I hope that's something that people are thinking about, because there's only one Dan Gates to, in the team.
Yeah, but
that,
you wouldn't want too many of this one. You could have different versions of it.
Okay, but we need to replicate and find people like you who have relationships, have the ability to communicate this, understands the processes within their state. Because for me to come to your state and try to advocate, I don't know your laws about, registered lobbyists. I don't know your laws about ballot initiatives. We're kind of kidding ourselves if we think we're going to have one national group that's going to have our bases covered. This is local stuff. It is local relationships. It's knowing who the players are. It's knowing what the laws are, where the communication platforms are. And I hope that we don't just look in the rearview mirror and say, we won the Super Bowl, let's spike the ball and everybody go home. Mm-hmm. Because there's more games coming, like you've pointed out here.
Yeah.
And the sooner we get that infrastructure in place, whether it's people, whether it's groups, whether it's funding mechanisms, whatever it is, the sooner that we get it in place, by far, the greater the likelihood that we're going to end up with victory. And hopefully.
Yeah. And I think some of our problems that we run into are the head in the sand, the complacency with mediocrity. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that doesn't affect me. I don't lion hunt, or that's not going to happen here. That'll never happen here. But anybody that has paid attention to things like what you've been dealing with on the public land issues, or they talk about, we had this attempt at a citizen's petition, which could be potentially become a ballot initiative about live bait in the state of Colorado. And we're not talking about chickens in bobcat cages, because that's already illegal. We're talking about minnows and night crawlers and crickets. It's live bait. And people go, oh, that can't be true. And you look at it, and you look at things that are so outlandish that the average person could not comprehend in any way, shape, or form. And I think that, going back to my assumption that if people just gave 8 hours a year, even if they just turn around and paid attention to the stuff that's not the shiny object, that's the most boring, benign crap that you have to ever live with. But if you start paying attention, you go, well, when did that happen? Well, how did this happen? I mean, look at Colorado as an example. The gun bills that came through our legislature this year, but a lot of them started last year. And it wasn't so bad. It wasn't that big of a deal. But then they turn around and got it passed last year, and then they turn around and add to it this year.
Yep.
Now, they wouldn't have got them both done in the same year. That's why they did it that way. But the things that people say, well, that's a constitutional right. Maybe it is, but who's going to fight it?
Exactly. It's a constitutional right as long as you're willing to take it to the courts.
Exactly.
And defend your right.
Yeah. And so if they can do what they can do, whether it's legislatively or ballot initiative or otherwise, if they can do that on a right, how do they not do that on a privilege like hunting and fishing? Now, some states have the right to hunt and fish.
Which we do in Montana, but it's still under attack.
Exactly.
And, some of them say, well, as long as you get the right to hunt for one day a year, you've met your constitutional requirement.
I was told facetiously that as long as, because the way Colorado's set up, as long as they gave you permission, if they wanted to give you permission to hunt starlings with a rock, and made that a legal method to take, that would be your right to hunt. It doesn't have to give you an unequivocal right for 78 game species like what we have.
Yeah, and that's where I think some people, myself, let's face it, Dan, we're all human. There's things that come across or should come across my newsletters or my emails, and they don't. And so I end up being unaware. Mm-hmm. But I don't think there's any reason for us to not be aware, at least of the things happening in, I always call it our backyard. What I mean is our state. Okay, maybe you aren't going to be worried about what's going on in Illinois or Washington or, wherever. But it's imperative that we know what's going on in our own states because that's where we have the most influence.
That's where you
and
got the most
at
influence,
risk.
but that's where people should be paying attention. And often I get people that say, "Did you hear what Arizona's doing?" And they might live in Wyoming. And I said, "Yeah, it's pretty bad. Did you hear what you're doing in Wyoming?" And they're like, "What's that?" I'm like, because it wasn't the shiny object.
Right.
I'll mention this, and it's Initiative 82, which might very well be the next ballot initiative that we have to deal with in Colorado.
Okay. So you pulled it up on your phone there?
Yeah. And so it's the Colorado Wildlife and Biodiversity Protection Act. Now, they're trying to go through the title board, the Secretary of State, and eventually the Supreme Court. But what this would do would essentially up in Colorado Parks and Wildlife to make it non-existent.
Really?
Now, if you look at what the New Mexico legislature just did this year, where they changed the name, then they changed the scope, and they went through all this hoopla about the ecosystem and the biodiversity side. They did that legislatively, but they don't have ballot initiatives in the state of New Mexico.
Okay.
Almost the same language, not in totality, but verbatim. And this would actually create another commission that would be not selected by the governor, but it wouldn't have any wildlife advocates on there, and it wouldn't have anything to do with anything like what Colorado Parks and Wildlife is doing now, similar to what could be interpreted out in New Mexico. This commission would have the authority to identify keystone species to where you couldn't do anything for any reason on any piece of ground that a keystone species was on. They could do Abert squirrels if they wanted to. Maybe it was wolves. Maybe it was sage grouse. Maybe it was black-footed ferrets.
Right.
Those, to some degree, would be endangered or threaten their keystone. But what if they did that to moose or bobcats or prairie dogs? Because this commission, it would not allow them and wouldn't not allow them to do any of it. And there's a component in here. It talks about defunding and disbanding the current makeup of what we have. So this other
in your
one,
Parks and Wildlife.
yes.
Commission.
So this other one would automatically replace that. Now, the worst part about that is this is a 9-page ballot initiative that they're circulating through the Legislative Council and the eventual Secretary of State and the Title Board. If you read anywhere into the 9 pages and you just look at and you say that can't pass, there's no way that's not going to pass. Read the title. Colorado Wildlife and Biodiversity Protection Act. The same target audience that we talk to trying to convince them not to vote on mountain lion and bobcat harvest or to vote positive on our end. Those are the same people we'd have to turn around and convince. So now here we talk about the science.
Right.
We talk about the data, the science in the wild, and you want to turn around and put this ballot initiative in front of them. And for any animal rights extremist or anti that's listening to these type of podcasts, they might sit there and go, we got these guys and we can turn around and do whatever we want. The reality is, I don't think that the target audience on the Front Range, the 4.9 million voters on the Front Range of Colorado, or the several 100,000 in Wyoming, or the million or whatever in Montana, I don't think that they're ignorant enough to fall for the lies and fallacies and falsehoods. However, you don't have to worry about falling for it if there's nobody there to turn around and oppose it, like what CRWM did on Proposition 127.
Right.
You have to have a strategy. You have to have that Amish barn raising community. You have to have the preparation in what you know is inevitable. And I think stuff like this is inevitable.
Yeah.
And even if it's not and it doesn't go through circulation this go around,
it's coming.
It's coming. Yeah. Because you can see what they tried to do in Oregon with IP3, an animal sanctuary state. You wouldn't be able to kill a mouse. You couldn't raise chickens. You couldn't fish. You couldn't squirrel hunt. You couldn't raise cows.
Yep.
That is not a far-fetched idea for a lot of these groups. And if you don't have groups propped up to oppose that sort of stuff, well, it could happen in Ohio. Right. It could happen in Tennessee. It could happen in Texas.